The grey Ohio sky hung low, a damp blanket over the rows of modest houses that lined the street. It was a morning like any other, defined by the familiar scent of dew on asphalt and the distant rumble of the first city bus. On the corner, Sarah stood waiting, her worn coat pulled tight against the chill. She was a woman of quiet, unassuming beauty, but a persistent sadness lived in her eyes. A shadow that her gentle smile could never quite chase away. The world saw a supermarket cashier, a wife living a simple, predictable life. But beneath that placid surface was a void, an ache so profound it had hollowed out a space in her soul. Every morning she performed this ritual, waiting for the bus that would take her to a job that paid the bills, all while her heart remained at home. In a small, perfectly assembled nursery that had never heard the sound of a baby's cry, a sound thin and sharp, cut through the morning's monotony. At first, she dismissed it as a stray kitten, a common enough occurrence in the alley beside the bus stop. But it came again, a desperate, reedy wail that snagged at something deep inside her. Curiosity, mixed with a strange sense of urgency, pulled her away from the curb. She followed the sound past overflowing garbage cans until her eyes landed on a simple cardboard box, its flaps slightly ajar. The cry came from within. Hesitantly, she reached down and parted the cardboard. Time seemed to stop. Curled inside, wrapped in a threadbare blanket against the cold, was a baby. His face was impossibly small, his skin pale, his tiny fists clenched, as if fighting a world that had already discarded him. The sight didn't just shock her, it shattered the fragile composure she wore every single day. In that frozen moment, the ache of her own infertility, a constant dull pain she had carried for years, transformed into a fierce, protective fire. The baby's cry wasn't just a sound of distress. It was the echo of the crushing silence in her own home, the answer to a prayer she had long since stopped whispering. She knelt on the cold, damp concrete, her knees unfeeling, and gently pushed the blanket back from his face. His eyes, large and dark, fluttered open and met hers. They were filled with a terrifying vulnerability, yet held a purity that disarmed her completely. Reaching out a trembling hand, she touched his cheek, feeling the chill of the morning on his soft skin. He wasn't a stranger. In the depths of his gaze, Sarah felt an impossible, instantaneous recognition, as if she had just found a lost and vital piece of her own soul. Without a second thought, her purpose for the day, for her life, became singular and clear. The bus, her job, the routine that had defined her existence, it all vanished. She carefully lifted the baby from the box, his small weight a shocking and wonderful burden in her arms. Tucking him inside her coat, she held him close, whispering reassurances against his downy hair as she ran, not toward the bus stop, but toward home. Her first and only instinct was to give him what he had been so cruelly denied: warmth, safety, a place to belong. It's in these moments, when a single choice can rewrite a destiny, that you witness the true power of the human heart. If you believe in stories that show us the depth of our own humanity, please subscribe and help us continue to bring them to light. She didn't know it then, but she was running toward the miracle she had given up on. When Michael opened the front door, the weariness from his factory shift was etched on his face, but it vanished in an instant, replaced by a profound, questioning stillness. He saw Sarah standing in the middle of their small living room, her coat still on, cradling a tiny bundle. No words were needed. Her eyes, filled with a desperate, fierce love he hadn't seen in years, told him everything. The silence in their home, usually a heavy shroud of unspoken grief, was broken by a soft, questioning coo from the infant in her arms. Michael slowly closed the door, shutting out the rest of the world. He walked toward her, not with questions, but with an open heart. He looked down at the baby, then back at his wife, and in that shared glance, a silent pact was formed. This child, a miracle left in a cardboard box, was now theirs to protect. That first night was a blur of instinct and whispered anxieties. Sarah carefully bathed the baby in the kitchen sink, his tiny body fragile under her gentle hands. She named him Noah, a name that felt like a promise of a new beginning. They had no diapers, no formula, no crib. Michael made a late-night run to the 24-hour convenience store, returning with essentials that felt foreign and monumental in their hands. Sarah retrieved a soft, yellow blanket from the nursery, the one she had knitted years ago while dreaming of a child of her own. Seeing it wrapped around Noah, this real, breathing baby, was a moment of such intense, painful beauty that it took her breath away. The perfectly arranged nursery, a monument to their loss, had finally found its purpose, its silence filled with the soft sounds of a sleeping child. Michael watched his wife mesmerized. The shadow of sadness that had lived in her eyes for so long had been replaced by a focused, radiant light. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with in high school, the one full of life and effortless joy. Before years of heartbreaking doctor's appointments and failed treatments had chipped away at her spirit, he had feared their shared grief would eventually build a wall between them. But seeing her with Noah, he realized it had instead forged a foundation strong enough to hold this unexpected miracle. He knew the road ahead would be impossibly difficult. They didn't have much money, and the world wouldn't understand. But as he placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, he felt a certainty that settled deep in his bones. They were a family. The next morning, reality arrived with the harsh light of day. They knew they couldn't keep this a secret. With a trembling hand and a heavy heart, Sarah made the call to Child Protective Services. Each word she spoke felt like a betrayal, as if she were giving away a piece of her own soul. She explained the situation in a calm, measured tone, but inside, a storm of panic was raging. The woman on the other end of the line was professional, but detached, her questions about the baby's condition and their address feeling like cold, clinical intrusions into the most sacred moment of their lives. When she hung up, the waiting began. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that drove past the house sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The fear of losing Noah was already an unbearable weight. The arrival of the social worker, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Albright, felt like an invasion. She walked through their small, tidy home with a critical eye. Her clipboard, a symbol of the bureaucratic power that could shatter their newfound world. She asked questions that felt designed to expose their inadequacies. Did they have a stable income? Did they understand the legal ramifications of their actions? Sarah answered each question with quiet dignity, but she felt like an imposter in her own home, her love for Noah being scrutinized and judged as if it were a liability. Mrs. Albright's gaze lingered on the untouched nursery, a room filled with hope that now, under her inspection, seemed to represent a desperate, unstable obsession rather than a loving preparation for a family. The neighborhood, once a source of quiet community, became a landscape of whispers and sidelong glances. News traveled fast in their small town, and the story of the found baby at the cashier's house became a piece of local gossip. Some neighbors offered hesitant congratulations and bags of hand-me-down clothes, their kindness a small balm on Sarah's frayed nerves. But others were less charitable. She overheard two women talking at the grocery store, questioning their financial ability to raise a child, wondering aloud if Sarah's desperation had clouded her judgment. The social judgment was a constant, low-grade hum of disapproval, a reminder that their love was on trial, not just in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. It's so difficult to grasp the sheer strength it takes to love against the current, and if these stories of quiet courage resonate with you, please consider subscribing to help us continue giving them a voice. Their fear intensified when Noah developed a fever. What would have been a common cold in any other home became a life-or-death crisis in theirs. Sarah held him through the night, his small body hot against hers, his whimpers tearing at her heart. She was terrified to take him to a doctor, afraid it would be seen as further proof of her inability to care for him properly, a mark against them in the system. But her love for him was stronger than her fear. She bundled him up, and with Michael by her side, they drove to the emergency room, the sterile, impersonal environment feeling like another place where they didn't belong, where their right to care for this child would be questioned and possibly revoked. At the hospital, they faced another round of probing questions from doctors and nurses. Who were they? How did they come to have this child? Every explanation felt inadequate, painting them as reckless and irresponsible. Yet as the doctor examined Noah, his professional demeanor softened. He noted the clean clothes, the well-fed appearance, and the unmistakable bond between the baby and the woman who refused to leave his side. "He's a lucky little boy," the doctor said quietly to Sarah as he wrote a prescription. "He's clearly in good hands." The words were a lifeline, a small, crucial validation that gave her the strength to keep fighting against the tide of doubt that threatened to pull them under. The nights were the hardest. Long after Michael had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Sarah would sit in the rocking chair in the nursery, holding Noah close. The room was no longer a place of sorrow, but a sanctuary. In the quiet darkness, she allowed her deepest fears to surface. The ghost of her own infertility haunted her, whispering that she was a fraud, that real mothers didn't find their children in boxes. She would trace the delicate lines of Noah's face with her finger, memorizing every detail. Terrified that these moments were fleeting, she made him silent promises, vowing that she would never let him feel the coldness of abandonment again, that her love would be a fortress to protect him from the world. The official process began, and it was as cold and unforgiving as they had feared. They were informed that Noah would be placed in their temporary foster care while the state conducted a thorough search for any biological relatives. Their application to adopt him was met with skepticism. Their modest income, Michael's factory job, their small rented house, it was all documented as evidence of their unsuitability. The forms they had to fill out were endless, the legal jargon a confusing maze designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Each step felt like another door slamming shut. The system itself, a powerful adversary that saw them not as a loving family, but as a statistical risk. But in the midst of the bureaucratic storm, their love for Noah became an anchor. One evening, Michael came home, bone-tired from a double shift, to the sound of Sarah softly singing. He found her in the nursery, swaying with Noah in her arms, her voice a gentle melody that filled the small room with a profound sense of peace. The heavy silence of their past had been replaced by this. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around them both. "We're not giving up on him, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't care what we have to do. He's our son." In that moment, they were not just a couple united by grief, but two parents united by an unbreakable love for their child. A few weeks later, the call they had been dreading finally came. A social worker informed them that the state search had yielded a potential lead. A distant relative of the birth mother, an aunt who lived several states away, had been located and had expressed an interest in the child. The news landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from Sarah's lungs. The abstract threat of losing him had suddenly taken on a name and a face. A person with a biological claim that felt infinitely more powerful than their love. The fragile world they had built around Noah began to tremble, the fear of his empty crib becoming a vivid, terrifying possibility that loomed over them, threatening to plunge their home back into a silence more profound than any they had ever known. The day of the hearing arrived cloaked in a cold, institutional grey that mirrored the sterile walls of the courtroom. The room felt vast and intimidating, the high ceiling swallowing the sound of their nervous breaths. Sarah and Michael sat at a small table, feeling like insignificant footnotes in a story that was their entire world. Across the aisle sat the distant aunt, a woman they had never met, whose biological claim felt like an insurmountable wall. The state's attorney, a sharp man in a tailored suit, methodically laid out their case, his voice devoid of emotion as he detailed their modest income, Michael's factory wages, and their status as renters. Each fact he presented was a carefully aimed stone intended to chip away at their credibility and prove that their love, however sincere, was simply not enough to build a stable future for a child. When Sarah's name was called, a wave of cold fear washed over her. Walking to the witness stand felt like climbing a mountain, each step heavy with the weight of what was at stake. She sat down, her hands trembling in her lap, and faced the room. The attorney's questions were sharp and probing, designed to paint her as a desperate, emotionally unstable woman who had acted on impulse. For a moment, the old ghosts of inadequacy whispered in her ear, telling her she was an imposter, that she had no right to this child. But then she looked at Michael, his face a portrait of unwavering belief in her. She thought of Noah, of his trusting eyes and the way his tiny hand curled around her finger. A quiet strength bloomed in her chest, pushing aside the fear. This wasn't a trial about her failings. It was a testament to his worth. She began to speak, her voice low but steady, cutting through the tense silence of the room. She didn't talk about legal rights or parental fitness. She talked about the silence. She described the profound, aching emptiness that had filled their home for years. A quiet so heavy it felt like a constant presence. She told the court about the nursery, a room meticulously prepared with love that had become a monument to their grief. Then, her voice softening, she described the first time she heard Noah's cry. It wasn't the sound of an abandoned baby, it was the sound of life, the first note of a song she had yearned to hear. She explained that Noah hadn't just broken the silence, he had transformed it, turning their house from a place of waiting into a home filled with purpose, with laughter, with love. The state's attorney tried to interrupt, to steer the conversation back to bank statements and employment records, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Sarah turned her gaze to the judge, her eyes clear and honest. "We don't have a lot of money to give him, Your Honor," she said, her voice resonating with a truth that no document could capture. "But we can give him every peaceful night's sleep, every hug that heals fear, and a last name that means home. Our love isn't in our bank account, it's in every corner of our house, waiting for him." In that moment, she was no longer the infertile woman defined by what she lacked. She was a mother, defending her son. Her words, a powerful declaration that the deepest bonds are not forged in biology, but in the unwavering commitment of the heart. A profound stillness settled over the courtroom. The distant aunt lowered her gaze, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. The judge, a man accustomed to the cold facts of law, took off his glasses and rubbed his weary eyes. He looked at the paperwork detailing their financial struggles, then at the couple whose faces shone with a love so fierce it was almost tangible. After a long, heavy moment, he put his glasses back on. "A home is not measured by its size, but by the love that fills it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Permanent custody is granted to Mr. and Mrs. Miller." The words washed over Sarah, a wave of relief so powerful it stole her breath. Stories like this remind us that love is the most powerful force we have. By subscribing, you help us continue to share these profound testaments to the human spirit. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, not of sorrow, but of a profound, soul-shaking relief that left her breathless. Michael wrapped his arm around her, his own eyes glistening, and pulled her into an embrace that was both a celebration and a shield. They walked out of the courthouse not as temporary caregivers, but as parents, the weight of the world lifted from their shoulders and replaced by the sweet, simple reality of their son. The drive home was a blur of quiet joy, the official adoption papers resting on the seat between them like a sacred text. That evening, the nursery was no longer a room of ghosts and what-ifs. It was simply Noah's room, alive with the whir of a mobile and the soft glow of a nightlight. The silence they had once feared was now filled with the gentle rhythm of a baby's breath, a sound more beautiful than any symphony, a testament to a love that had faced down the world and won. Their journey, however, had left scars. Sarah never forgot the sting of the neighbors' whispers or the cold judgment in the eyes of the system. She remembered the profound loneliness of their struggle, the feeling that they were the only ones fighting such a battle. Determined that no one else in their town should feel that isolated, she and Michael started a small, informal gathering in their living room on the first Tuesday of every month. It was a support group for couples navigating the difficult paths of infertility and adoption. They shared coffee, stories, and tears, creating a sanctuary of understanding in a world that was often quick to judge. They didn't offer legal advice or financial aid. They offered something far more valuable, the unwavering belief that every person who opens their heart to a child deserves to be called a parent. 5 years passed, transforming their small house into a vibrant, chaotic, and endlessly happy home. The backyard, once a quiet patch of grass, was now a kingdom ruled by a 5-year-old boy with his father's kind eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Noah was a whirlwind of scraped knees, grass stains, and infectious laughter. One warm summer evening, Sarah sat on the back steps, watching him chase fireflies, a serene smile gracing her lips. The shadow of sadness that had once lived in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, settled peace. Michael came out and sat beside her, wrapping his arm not just around her, but around the gentle, unmistakable swell of her belly. The miracle they had fought so hard for had opened the door for the one they had long since given up on, proving that a heart healed by love has an infinite capacity to grow. They watched their son, a beacon of light in the deepening twilight, and in that perfect quiet moment they understood the profound truth of their lives. True family wasn't something determined by biology or circumstance, but something forged in the crucible of unwavering love and selfless courage. They had let go of the life they thought they were supposed to have, and in doing so, they had found the one they were truly meant to live. Noah was not a replacement for a dream they had lost. He was the dream they never knew they needed. It is in sharing these journeys of the heart that we are all reminded of our own capacity for hope and love. If you believe in the power of these stories, subscribing is the most meaningful way to help us continue to bring them into the world. Their love story wasn't about finding a baby in a box. It was about discovering that home is not a place you are born into, but a place you build for each other.